voluntary, and confidential. Employees have access to trained staff counselors through our EAP. They can also use Talk Now, which offers ASC employees immediate 24/7 telephonic access to confidential, in-the-moment counseling support delivered by quality behavioral health professionals with no appointment necessary. In addition to these services, many of the resources offered by the House Wellness Center and the House Office of Employee Assistance are available to AOC employees. In the weeks following the building breach, we also hosted an office hours employee session to provide a venue to all employees to share their concerns, ask questions, and hear directly from our Director of EAP and the agency's ombudsman. We also are planning proactive counseling sessions for our tradesmen, support staff, and artists who were directly impacted by the 6th. Since becoming the architect of the Capitol a little over a year ago, I've been continually impressed and inspired by the great work of this agency. We have been in pandemic operations for nearly a year. We supported 3 lying-in states or honor ceremonies and prepared for a presidential inauguration, all during the pandemic. I am honored to lead a team whose extraordinary efforts on January 6th and the days that followed helped Americans of all walks of life take solace in seeing order restored to the U.S. Capitol. We would appreciate your support to ensure that we are positioned to address ongoing and future facility needs, in addition to the health and wellness of our employees. Thank you, and I am prepared to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Blanton. We appreciate it. You've had quite the first year here. We appreciate what you've done. Next, Ms. Spindor.
Good morning, Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera Butler, and members of the subcommittee. As you know, my appointment as Chief Administrative Officer began on Sunday, January 3rd. Just 3 days later, the Capitol was under siege. Like so many of the members and staff, I was sheltering in place along with several CAO employees as chaos ensued just outside of our office here in the Capitol. Although I will never forget those harrowing hours, I'm tremendously grateful for the dedication and rapid response of so many of my colleagues and professionals from all House entities, including members, staff, and the U.S. Capitol Police. The efforts to restore order and protect our democracy were shining examples of the commitment we all share for this great institution. As the insurrection was occurring, our Office of Cybersecurity took several critical actions to ensure the House network, equipment, and technology infrastructure remains secure. Over the following several weeks, we provided guidance to the House community and responded to various member inquiries about the House's cybersecurity posture. Please know that the House's Chief Information Security Officer and his staff are prepared to brief any member interested in discussing the current state of cybersecurity at the House. In response to the mental and emotional well-being needs of the House community, our Office of Employee Assistance handled over 1,150 individual interactions over the 6-week period since January 6th. At the peak of their workload, OEA had 7 additional contractor counselors to support a 8-team staff. The supplemental contracting staff included 4 on-site crisis counselors dedicated specifically to the U.S. Capitol Police. Be assured we will all continue to coordinate with the Capitol Police to determine future consulting services needs and how we can best support them. I recognize the gravity of the moment we find ourselves in, and as such, I encourage any member or staffer of the House community who is struggling with a personal issue to please reach out directly to the Office of Employee Assistance. They are poised and positioned to help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The House Wellness Center has been another integral component in promoting the health and well-being of members and staff. And Mr. Chairman, as a champion of this program, we cannot thank you enough. The Wellness Center takes a holistic approach to improved well-being, providing resources and services to the entire House community. Their solutions are offered on a variety of platforms, ensuring every member has the same level of access and care, and includes support for personal issues that may impact the individual's overall mental or physical well-being. The growth and popularity of the Wellness Center in just over 2 years is highly impressive. I would also like to take this opportunity to highlight the CAO's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Less than a year ago today, the CAO, along with our legislative branch partners, rapidly responded to prepare offices for maximum telework. This daunting and unprecedented challenge required coordination with no prior roadmap to replicate. Fortunately, the unwavering support from House leadership made our transformation to a remote workforce possible. While none of us could have imagined the full impact of this pandemic, it is important to highlight that our migration to Microsoft Office 365 in the summer of 2019 was critical to our successful ability to telework over the past 12 months. These proactive efforts have supported nearly 21 million chat messages, 425,000 virtual meetings, and an average of more than 6,000 House staffers who are able to connect on a daily basis to do their work. As the nation continues to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, the CAO stands ready to assist and execute critical initiatives in support of ongoing operations for the House of Representatives. Thank you, Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera-Butler, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spindor. We appreciate you and your team. Mr. Bland had an interesting first year. You've had an interesting first couple of months, and we appreciate you rising to the occasion. Next, Ms. Elliott.
Chairperson Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera-Butler, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your ongoing support for the Office of the Clerk's work and for the opportunity to testify today about the Clerk's response to damage to the fine art collection of the House on January 6, 2021, and our budget request related to that damage. The House collection of fine art and artifacts encompasses the sweep of the institution's history, 13,000 objects that tell the story of the People's House. As provided in U.S. Code and under the direction of the House Collections Oversight Body, the House Fine Arts Board, the Clerk is responsible for care of this collection. 219 objects from the House collection were on display in the Capitol on January 6th. On January 7th, I and the rest of the Clerk's curatorial staff made a preliminary inspection of every object on display. The Senate curator and I also undertook a walkthrough of the entire building, coordinating with our colleagues at the Architect of the Capitol. Our preliminary inspection identified 8 House collection objects with potential damage, 6 sculptures and 2 paintings. All of them are adjacent to the chamber's north doors, and they were covered in a fine powder. The Smithsonian Institution's Museum Conservation Institute analyzed and identified that powder as fire extinguisher particulate and containing, among other chemicals, an oily yellow dye. In the coming weeks, we will begin conservation treatment to remove chemicals and accretions and dye before they cause permanent discoloration and harm. Conservation of those 8 objects is significantly more than the unexpected damage that we plan for every year. Our entire conservation plan for this fiscal year is only 6 projects: annual treatment, for delicate treasures like the silver inkstand in the chamber, schedule treatment for other pieces that are stable but eventually need work, and a plan to address one instance of emergency intervention. To enable us to conserve 8 objects as emergency interventions, as well as continue the sound care of the entire collection, we respectfully request the subcommittee's support for a supplemental appropriation of $25,000 for conservation of House collection objects. Thank you again for the subcommittee's continued support of the clerk's role as a steward of the House's heritage. And thank you for the opportunity to testify about that. I look forward to answering any questions that the committee has.
Thanks, Ms. Elliott. We appreciate it. And thanks for all the good work you do behind the scenes. We work in such a special place. And I know, like most members, we sometimes take it for granted. We're always hustling to go get a vote in or run to a meeting. But we really appreciate the work. And it's such a magnificent space that you help preserve. So thank you for that. We're going to move to the question and answers, and we will start with the ranking member, Ms. Herrera-Butler.
Thank you so much. Man, just hearing that last piece, I mean, hearing from all of you was important. But it just what the chairman said, you stop and think about the fact that we get to work in this place, the People's House. It's the most amazing thing ever. We do scurry around a lot, getting our business done, don't take the time to think about it. So thank you all, because I know that is a big part of your job, is to think about it all the time to preserve for the American people. And I so appreciate it. I'm going to start with Mr. Blanton. As a member of the Capitol Police Board, you have insight into the events and decisions made on January 6th. And I'm particularly interested in the statement you released in response to acting U.S. Capitol Police Chief Yogananda Pittman's testimony, where she stated that the Capitol Police made a request of the board for support prior to January 6th. You released a statement refuting Chief Pittman's assertion that there were verbal or written requests prior to January 6th. And I guess I think the question is, why do you feel compelled to release that statement and expand on the assertion you made in the statement? And could you detail, if any, formal or informal meetings that were held by the board prior to January 6th and what those meetings entailed? And then I have a little follow-up if there's time. Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to answer. There were 2 points that I refuted. One was my attendance at a meeting on January 3rd. And in that meeting, no individual from the architect of the Capitol staff nor I was at that meeting. It was later learned that meeting may have been with a smaller audience, but it did not include my staff. The second point was that she mentioned that Chief Sund asked the Capitol Police Board for additional resources. Chief Sund, as he stated in his testimony yesterday in his letter to the Speaker, went directly to both sergeants at arms and asked for that. And I was refuting the point that I was not asked specifically for those for additional resources. There was a meeting on January 5th that was hosted by then Chief Sund regarding the inauguration planning, and it was an interagency meeting with the police forces throughout the Washington, D.C. area that have a role in inauguration. During that, there was most of it was introduction of what the roles and responsibilities were during the inauguration. There was a little discussion about the 6th, most of it centering around, at that time, there was no credible evidence, although there was chatter for events that may occur on January 6th.
Thank you. With regard to the board specifically, and I know you just detailed meetings that took place, and I apologize if you can hear baby screaming in the background. Are you aware of any discussion by the actual board members regarding the intelligence showing the possible disturbance on the 6th? Like in a more, like the board itself?
As an entity, we did not have that. I understand there was an intelligence assessment that was released on the 4th by the Capitol Police. It went to the sergeants at arms, and from what I've learned later is that intelligence assessment says it was improbable or not likely that there would be violence on the 6th.
Are you aware of any requested changes by the former House Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, to the physical security plan prior to January 6th?
There was requested changes, and Chief Sund alluded to it by changing expanding the security perimeter. He alluded to that both in his letter and in his testimony yesterday in front of the Senate.
So was your office asked to modify positioning of any perimeter barricades? And if so, did you find the request consistent with the direction given ahead of previously planned protests?
So yes, my staff was asked to move barricades, and that was a different footprint than we had in a previous, whether it was the MAGA or the protests that occurred during the summer months. It was a different footprint than was originally used then.
Thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Ms. Ray Butler. I just want to follow up on one of those, Mr. Bland. So just so the committee is clear on this, when the chief was asking the sergeant at arms for more support, that wasn't necessarily a clear ask of the board, correct? Or was it an ask of the board? And if it was, does the board have to vote on that, or how does that process work?
Yes, so it was portrayed, and I'm only speaking from what I've seen in media. It was portrayed by Chief Sund, or my interpretation of his portrayal of it was that he was asking for support from the sergeants at arms. In order to have gotten an emergency declaration, there would have to be a board vote. So there was not an official ask at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't go into his mind on whether he was asking because he wanted to see if there was an appetite for it, or he was saying, okay, I'm going to come ask for this in the future.
Yeah, just so, again, I want the committee and we want the committee and the American people to know how this works. So if the chief, is it two different things for the chief to say to the sergeant at arms, hey, we need you to declare an emergency, we need more help? Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Is that separate from an official ask for the board? So does he have to have a written ask to the board or a written ask to the sergeant at arms? And if the sergeant at arms gets a request from the chief of police is he then required to bring it to the board?
So any conversations with the sergeant at arms and the chief of police, when it comes to a board matter, it's just a conversation. In order for it to be official, we would have an official request. Now, those don't have to necessarily be in writing. We could follow that up with the paperwork. Should it be an emergency, an actual quick needed emergency? And in this case, it seemed like he was, at least from his testimony, was having conversations and feeling out the need for additional resources. Because if there was a need for it, he could have submitted an official thing where we had a board vote.
That's some of that moving forward, we need to completely understand the operation of the board and how the board works and what that process is. And, we're trying to really determine how that works, and that will help us understand how things went down.
Mr. Chairman,
if I can be clear on one thing, so we can do a verbal vote on the board. So if goes to the chairman of the police board and says, I want to do this, we need to do it now, we can have a verbal vote and get it done, and then follow it up with the written paperwork, so there's nothing slowing anything down.
So not at any time did the sergeant at arms, did Mr. Irving say to you, hey, we need to have a vote on this? My recommendation is we don't pass an emergency order for whatever reason. I asked the chief to ask the National Guard to lean in, but we're not going to do anything here. He never brought that to your attention and said, hey, should we do a vote on this? Do you want to do a vote on this? Or obviously you didn't vote on it, correct?
That's correct. It never came to the full board's attention.
Okay. Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Let me just let the committee know we're going to, because of the importance of this issue, we're going to take some liberties, not just the ranking member and I, but all members, because we want to make sure we follow the line of questioning and we are able to tease out all these answers. So every member of the committee will have a similar leeway. So, Ms. Ferrer-Butler.
I really appreciate it. I'll make it brief, and it's just for your consideration. I know we're going to be hearing from the board in different hearings over the next few days, but everybody's going to be in a separate hearing. I don't know how changing this would be, but it might be helpful to have everybody in the board at once in front of us. But we can see how this goes. It's just for your consideration. I know we are going to hear from the individuals, but I think as this line unfolds, I just have more of these questions, and it might be nice to be able to have them all sitting together. I don't even know if we can do that. That's my thought. Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Herrera-Butler, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming today to talk about not only the events of January 6th, but how we keep the citadel of our democracy safe and in a state of good repair. And Mr. Blanton, I want to return to you and this question around these meetings in advance of January 6th. My understanding is from your testimony that you were not part of the meeting on January 3rd, that you weren't involved until the meeting on the 5th. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And at that meeting on the 5th, was there a discussion of additional security barriers?
No, that meeting on the 5th's primary purpose was for law enforcement entities that are involved in the inauguration to brief what their planning is for the inauguration, and then also go over the overall national security event chain of command for the inauguration. There was some discussion on the 6th, but there was no discussion about any changes to any physical infrastructure, and it was very minor discussions about the threat, just saying that there wasn't likely an event on the 6th.
But that's very different than what Chief Sun testified to yesterday, that he did make the board aware of his concerns. And he also said that it was a regular practice to only discuss these types of security issues with sergeants at arms of the House and Senate, not including the architect of the Capitol. Do you agree with his statement that it is regular practice that you would not be included and your office would not be included in these type of meetings?
So I would say we do have these discussions at police board meetings, and so then I'm included. I do not know what conversations he had on a daily basis with either the House or the Senate Sergeant at Arms. And if that was his regular practice, then I think we found an issue with the operational chain of command of the Capitol Police Board, frankly.
So my understanding is that he asked for a emergency declaration. Is it possible that that could have been denied without your involvement?
It could not have, because the police board would have to have voted on it. It never got to the point that the police board was actually voted on the emergency declaration.
So were you aware of that request or were you not?
I was not.
You were not.
No.
Do you think that there are reforms we need to make to the way this Capitol Police Board operates so that you are not left out of these crucial conversations?
I do believe there's reforms that need to be made. I think they're broader than just what conversations occur with the architect of the Capitol or not. I believe, as a member of the police board, that there needs to be more accountability and transparency on some of the actions that we vote upon.
Can you go into a little more detail on how you would like to see that accountability and transparency improve? What are some specific things we should be looking at?
Well, I obviously my area of expertise is in the facilities.
Right.
A lot of the stuff when it comes to physical security, we overclassify. So there's information that could be of vital importance to members, but is classified at a level that can't be shared. And many of these, if you look in the executive branch agencies, the classification isn't as high, or they do an unclassified version so that can give out information so that members have or interested parties have the ability to digest what that information is, so they understand, have a better understanding of what the physical constructs are in the area that they're working.
And what about around accountability? What reforms would you like to see?
I think again it goes to more a lot of decisions are ended up being classified. So there's a very few individuals who actually have visibility of what decisions are made by the police board.
And do you think that's the reason that you were not included in these discussions between January 3rd and January 6th around these concerns?
No, I do not think it was. I think it was, well, I'm speculating at why Chief Sun would have done that, but I think it just was, this is the standard for how they operated. Now, I can give them some deference, as we had a vacancy as the architect of the Capitol, so you had acting people in there for over a year. And so it could very well have been that their standard practices evolved into a way that they didn't include the acting people. But again, that's a speculation more than it is something where I would testify as a fact.
Thank you, Mr. Blanton. I see I'm over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks. Great line of questioning there, Ms. Clark. We are going to Mr. Amadei up next.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If I had written a book, I'd have it in the background, but what the heck.
My favorite.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I would like to, I want to start with something, since everybody we've heard from so far that are involved in the community of the campus on Capitol Hill has been talking about, obviously physical stuff, emotional stuff, all that other sort of stuff. So I want to start with Mr. Blanton. Mr. Blanton, do you know, since your function here is uniquely not able to be done from home, have all your folks received COVID vaccinations?
No. In fact, we've had a small distribution of COVID vaccines for my staff.
Okay, but they're still coming to the Hill every day and doing what they do, and especially as increased responsibility as a result of picking up the pieces from January 6th. Is that true?
Yes, they still are, and we are still following our COVID protocols that have worked very, very well on the Hill since the March-April timeframe of last year.
Okay, so let me ask you this. As a result of September 6th, have all of your staff taken advantage of the testing things that have been provided here on campus? Have they all been tested post January 6th?
I will say, not the entire staff, but anybody who has felt symptomatic or has filled out the Office of Attending Physician checklist and has marked one of them as positive, they are afforded and do take the available COVID tests on campus.
Okay, and I was listening as you were doing your introductory remarks, and they were quite rightfully complimentary of the mission that your folks have, the criticalness of it in terms of keeping the citadel of democracy functioning and stuff like that. I'm assuming that you're basically rock solid in terms of that analysis, and your folks perform a function that is vital and what was even above and beyond the call on January 6th.
I can tell you from myself and my staff, we are at awe every day at the facilities that we work on, that we work in, and that we support.
Okay.
The morale of my staff for the work that they do, they love the work they do. They are truly artisans, and they come to work saying, I like what I'm doing. I want to come and continue this work. So,
well, I don't disagree with you. I just find it amazing that they're not important enough to also be somewhere on the list of critical government folks that, quite frankly, get the vaccine. But that's not your issue. That's mine. Miss Spinzer, same questions for you. Have your folks received the vaccine?
A small portion of our staff that are responsible for business continuity, and a few of the staff that have to be in the Capitol every day. Like Mr. Brett Blanton's folks, we have people here that are on site every single day, right, working directly with the members and their staff. And we would love to have all of them who do that vaccinated, but as of yet, we've gotten enough to have our critical staff vaccinated.
Okay, so I'm not trying to put any words in your mouth, but is the answer to my question, has all of your staff received vaccine? The answer to that question is no. You've prioritized folks, but in terms of your staff and their functions, no.
That's correct.
Have you had any communication with the attending physician's office or house admin about, hey, when are we going to get around to getting the rest of these people done?
We stay in direct contact with the office of the attending physician, and I know that he has looked into requesting additional vaccine. I think that that has been hard for him to obtain at this point, but we are waiting on him. We're looking to the office of attending physician to notify us when he has any additional dosage.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Blanton, I want to go back to you on a subject that deals directly with January 6th, and that is, I've already had a discussion with the acting sergeant at arms that goes something along these lines. Hey, listen, if we're going to have metal detectors to go vote, that's fine. That's not my hill to die for. But quite frankly, with the resources available or that can be available, can we do that in such a way that does not look like an afterthought in an airport lobby? And so it's like, is there technology that exists to build something tastefully in keeping with the resource that we're talking about, that basically people can walk through without having to go queue up in front of something that is taking space in hallways and stuff like that? And oh, by the way, can we set them so that shoes don't, so it doesn't require me to go in barefoot to get around the metal detector and then try to figure out, once I get in the chamber, as I'm redressing, what shoe goes on what foot? Has anybody approached your office about how we can perform that security function in the least visually and physically intrusive way in terms of the various and sundry entrances to the chamber, whether they be on the speaker's lobby, whether they be on the hallways by elevator banks? Is there not some more elegant thing available, or has anybody even checked into that?
So thank you. I think that is a wonderful question. I can say that nobody has specifically talked with me, but if I was to presume this, the Sergeant at Arms would probably deal with the superintendent of the House building first before coming to me. I think it's a very valid ask, and it's something that we should look at. But it's also something that, frankly, we need to look at in the construct of all the security and detection equipment across the entire campus. And I know my staff has looked at options for replacing metal detectors, and I can say that we will definitely take this on as something that should be looked at to find something that is, frankly, blends more in with the architecture of the chamber than portable metal detectors.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And obviously that's, Mr. Chairman, that's obviously, I'll talk with you about that more, but I just think that's something where it's like, that's fine. I think we can achieve the security goals without basically doing what we're doing now. And so I'll work with you on that offline to see if that can't be something that the committee works on. And I know my time's up, so I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it, Mr. Amadei. Thank you for your questioning along the lines of the vaccine. We've had a lot of work with trying to get it to the Capitol Police, where they had about 200 rank and file members who were had COVID-related issues, which put further stress. And so we've had to go through great lengths to try to get them their vaccinations. But I appreciate you raising that issue and the issue around the security. And maybe even Mr. Blanton could maybe get one of the engineers or architects over there to help you figure out, what shoe goes on what foot. We're happy to help you figure that out. Next up is Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to each and all of the three of you, I just want to join the comments by the chair and the ranking member, thanking you and your teams for your service, for your commitment, and for your honesty and candor as we try to sort through the immediacy of January 6th, as well as the broader issues, for example, the trade-offs between securing the Capitol and guaranteeing access that we want to guarantee. It seems to me that I'd like to step back just a second, and Mr. Blanton, I'll direct this at you. It seems to me that we have three broad questions dealing with January 6th. Number one is kind of a past question, what happened and why? Number two is a present question, which is how can we continue to deal with the lingering effects today of January 6th, for example, consequences to our employees, and then number three, how do we prevent this from happening again? And we can't do much about the past because it already happened, but we can take the lessons of the past. The present, I think we've tried to address that, but it's more number three that I'm focused on, which is how do we sort through the lessons and implement those lessons? And here's my question to you. And again, the context is that we have already seen division in politics, leak into this evaluation. We've got a debate going over, whether we should have a 9/11 commission, and if so, what kind of membership it should have. I know that each and all of us has had the experience of seeing division within our own communities over the continuing security barriers around the Capitol, with kind of oversimplifying this. One side saying it's necessary to prevent, further attacks, and the other side basically saying, take the wall down, it's not necessary. And that has a political angle to it. And I think we're trying to keep the politics out of this and just figure out what happened and why and how to prevent it from happening again. And here's my question. How do we actually best get to the bottom of those questions? What happened? Why, and how do we prevent it from happening again? And my My question has to do with whether we can do this internally adequately, or whether we really need objective, independent, outside evaluations. Good meaning people that were there and present at the moment can believe and hope that they have objectivity on it, but sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you're better with an external, independent, non-judgmental, non-political view. And I'm asking Mr. Blanton, what procedure do you think is best for us to pursue the questions that are in front of us? What happened? Why? How do we prevent it from happening again? To what extent do we need independent, objective, external views?
So thank you again. That's a great question. So being that my expertise is in the facilities side of it, what I'm proposing we have is a comprehensive facility security assessment, one that starts with threats. And in the past, if you look at our failures, and this is the entire federal government, this is not just the legislative branch, have been focused since the Oklahoma City bombing on protecting against an explosive device of a certain size in a certain location. And that is why we had things such as windows that were more secure right next to windows that were not secure, because they were addressing that certain threat with that certain set of risks. The other thing is, as we look from a broader threat, it needs to be in conjunction with our partners within the national capital area, so that we aren't hardening ourselves to a point that makes other entities soft targets, or they aren't doing the same and making us a soft target. And frankly, from my perspective, in my job, I have to look across the entire campus. So that's all the House buildings, Senate buildings, but it also includes the Library of Congress, the Supreme Court, and the Thurgood Marshall building that are in my portfolio. I want to make sure that all of those are included in that assessment. But the key to it is it starts with a series of threats that we all agree with. We can continue with the threats from the past of the explosive devices, but then bring them to even small things like a lone gunman, a squad of 6 people who want to invade, and then from that, what's the risk associated? And the risk is the likelihood of it occurring and the consequences of it occurs. From that, we come up with a set of mitigations, and those mitigations will be short-term ways to implement to help protect that. And then finally, a long-term set of solutions. And one key to it in my mind, it's very important, is that we say what the logistics tail is going to be to this. Because many of these ideas that we have of doing security, if they end up having to increase the number of Capitol police officers that have to stand a post or have to be in a certain area or pull them off of a post because of what we were doing for security, we need to have that identified so that we know what the total ownership cost is of these ideas, so that you as appropriators are fully informed when we go and ask for these, what the total cost is over the years, not just for this specific project.
Okay, I'll come back in my second round, but my question, you've identified, I think, the issues that we need to sort through, but my question was more about how do we get the answers? Is that an internal process or is that an external process? Do we need extra help? The resources side of it flow from getting the right answer to start with. I think we all want to provide the resources, but I want to have the right answers so that I am personally comfortable that I've done and resourced and directed what actually has to happen. And I'm fearful of an internal only assessment. So that was where my question was going.
Yeah, so what I'm proposing would bring in outside experts. In fact, we're proposing using the Army Corps, which has a protection center of excellence that looks specifically at that one for facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see everybody. Let me also add my voice of appreciation and thanks to the 3 folks that are in front of us this morning. All have very important jobs and responsibilities, and I really think that there's the big question in front of this committee as it stands right now is how can we together ensure that the institution, literally the Capitol grounds themselves, can really continue to provide that catalyst for public participation in our democracy, but also at the same time ensuring that those of us who work here certainly, and those members of the public that come can remain safe from those that may wish to do us harm. So I look forward to working with all of you toward those goals. I'd like to address my first questions to the Mr. Blanton, if I could, and kind of follow up with some of the line of questioning that other members have taken. Mr. Blanton, you mentioned in your testimony that institutional biases and action items taken out of sync, if I can use your words, with actionable data resulted in poor decisions during the Capitol attack. So could you talk about what some of those specific biases were that were detrimental to your office's response, and how can we as a committee help you, if there's a disconnect, how can we help you break that down so that you can provide positive, actionable actions with the data that you receive? And I guess putting that into English, how can we help you make that line of communication better?
Thank you. Again, I appreciate that question. So I was hired to transform the Architect of the Capitol. It was an entity that had a couple years of history that were very troubling, and we've had in the past some projects and programs that we did not execute very well. I'm in the middle of transforming that, and I will say that the AOC of today is not the AOC of last year. We're more responsive, we're more open, we're more accountable, and I am working to make sure that is even clearer on everything we do. Part of what I talk about by institutional biases is I have conversations with people and staffers, and they'll say, we don't believe you because a decade ago, this is what happened. Or a project 4 years ago, you guys messed up. It's those things like that it's not just in staffers, it's across the Capitol complex. And I admit, we had issues years ago, and the staff themselves are wonderful people who love their work, do incredible work, but we fumbled a few things in the past. But those fumbles aren't indicative of what the future is. If we continue to be judged by what decisions were made in the past or areas where we could have done better in the past, then we will never be able as a Capitol complex to advance. And so that's what I was alluding to in those statements.
And so in rectifying that, is there a role that we can assist you with, or is this going to be, the proof's in the pudding, that you have to build your own reputation and trust among colleagues and people that you're responsible to?
In many ways, the proof is in the pudding, but also it's I would say, come in with a approach that we are trying to do things the most honest, ethical, and efficient way possible. I mean, one thing that I have done that has been really sea change for my staff is when we talk about the budgets, I say it's not my money, it's the Capitol complex's money. So when someone says, I'm not going to allow you to do a project, it's not my project. It belongs to you, sir, because it's there to support you. I don't get benefit out of, I enjoy supporting you. I enjoy that. That's my job, is to support you. But the project itself is there for members and their staff. The project's not for AOC just to have work to do. And I don't want to have just work to do. I want to do stuff that has an outcome. So if you can look at it from that lens and that perspective and how we're dealing with things, that would be very helpful to our organization as a whole.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, if we have another round of questioning, also delve into some of the workings of the Capitol Police Board, as well as some of the assessments and where we go from here as far as the building is concerned. But I appreciate you all being here this morning and look forward to further conversation. Thank you.
You're muted, Tim.
Ms. Wexton, I'm in charge here, Kathleen. Ms. Wexton, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to add my voice to the chorus of members saying thank you to all the witnesses for everything that you've done before and since January 2nd to keep us safe and keep the Capitol running smoothly. Now, Mr. Blanton, I want to follow up a little bit more on the Capitol Police Board and your involvement in the decision making leading up to January 6th, because Capitol Police Board, just to refresh everybody's recollection, it consists of the 2 sergeants at arms, one for the Senate, one for the House, consists of the architect of the Capitol, that's you, and then the chief of the Capitol Police, but the chief of the Capitol Police does not get a vote. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So you testified that you had a meeting with law enforcement, different agencies on the 23rd of December, just generally talking about logistics for January 6th. Is that correct?
No, I talked about on January 5th, there was a meeting of law enforcement, and the subject of it was the preparations for the inauguration.
Okay, and was there discussion at that time about requesting National Guard assistance?
No, there was not.
Okay. Now, were you aware that at that time that acting Chief Pittman, that there had been a meeting on January 2nd where the DOD asked U.S. Capitol Police if they would need the National Guard?
I was not aware of that.
Okay. And according to Chief Pittman's testimony when she was before the subcommittee a couple weeks ago, she testified that on January 3rd, the U.S. Capitol Police changed their mind and Sun to ask for a National Guard, and it was denied. And apparently he asked maybe the sergeants at arms. Is that correct? I mean, but you didn't have any knowledge of that. Is that correct?
I had no knowledge of that, and I still have no knowledge of a meeting on the 3rd. There may have been a meeting on the 4th that he talked about, but we have no record of any meeting whatsoever. And later on, Chief Sun, his testimony, his paper talked about the 4th, but there was no formal meeting that I was at, nor anyone from my staff on the 3rd nor the 4th.
So is it just majority rules in the Capitol Police Board?
Oh, we try to get consensus, but if it gets down to it's a 2-3 vote, then it would be that.
Is it customary to leave one of the voting members out of the decision-making process?
Again, as I stated earlier, if he was officially asking for it, then there would not be. Then all of us would have the opportunity to vote. I only can paraphrase what I heard from Chief Sun's testimony and his letter that he wrote to the speaker, that he talked to the sergeant at arms. Now, I don't know if he was doing that to talk so that he is testing the waters, if we are able to do that, or what the board feels like, but he had not officially asked for it from the entire board itself.
All right, and have you previously been consulted about additional security measures in advance of protests and things in coming to Washington, D.C., for example, during the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer? Were you consulted about additional hardening and security measures around the Capitol at that time? So
my staff was in working in conjunction with the Capitol Police before police board meetings in the past to put up the bicycle rack barriers around the Capitol around the Capitol complex for every single event. And as Chief Sun said, they approach every event from a very similar construct, and so we do that when there's any known protests.
And that's what you did for the January 6th protests as well, right?
Yes.
Nothing further than the normal. And it was never elevated.
They did extend the police barrier, the bike rack barrier, for the January 6th event, as Chief Sun testified.
Right, but there were no additional barriers involved.
Correct.
Okay. Now, has the police board been in discussions as a committee of the whole talking about hardening after January 6th?
We've had several discussions about that.
And were you?
Yes, I've been.
So you were privy to the discussions about the temporary fencing as well as other options for the long term?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, but I will have more questions in another round.
There we go. Congressman Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank all of the folks that are testifying here today about this horrific day in the Capitol. As many of you know, the Capitol staff, particularly the custodial staff, is made up of many people of color, particularly men of color, who were targets, obviously, of this racist, bigoted mob. The images of the Confederate flag, of the gallows with the rope and noose, typifies the horrible history of lynching in the South and throughout the country, set deep fear among many of us workers. I myself witnessed when I went down to the Capitol at about 7:30, about 2 to 3 men of color mopping the area, the blood from where the shooting occurred right outside the Capitol. And so I want to know what's being done with these workers that are traumatized. And first of all, sending them down there right after this horrific attack was somewhat troubling to begin with. I could just imagine what they felt. When I saw them, I was terrified myself. I didn't really capture the fact right away, immediately, that they were mopping up blood. And to send folks that were clearly the target of this attack and couldn't take their pins off and blend, to then mop up the floor, I thought was a little bit too much. I want to know what's being done for these folks, and what the AOC and the administrators are doing to help the people that were traumatized during this attack.
Thank you. And I'll say my staff had great pride in the work they did immediately following. They actually were proud of themselves and the organization that they were able to clean up. The people who were dealing with blood were trained in biohazards, and so they had all the prerequisite skills to deal with the biohazards. The janitorial staff and the laborers who were vacuuming and cleaning up the glass, they volunteered to do that because they support the organization and they knew what was at stake. Well, at stake was the certification of the Electoral College. They have that sense of mission.
But allow me, we've heard from Capitol Police that were called the N-word. We saw the Confederate flag and the gallows with the noose and the rope out there. I just think sending men of color to mop up the blood after this horrific act is just a little bit over the top. Now, what are you doing now to address any issues, long-standing issues that they may have?
Well, thank you. And I was just about to get that. I'm sorry if I was taking too long. What we are doing is they are actively involved in our employee assistance program. One of the things that we are doing is instead of having it be where they feel like they have to call, because I know some of the men and women of the Arch of the Capitol, we're a tough group, and some of us want to internalize that. So we're going to have, we're proactively taking it for each of the trades who were there that day and having counseling sessions for them to talk about it. Additionally, in our supplemental request, we've asked for funds so that we could do an awards program for these staff that were there that day, so that they can get recognized beyond what our standard awards are at the AOC. Because I do feel like they went above and beyond the duty. And that's why we're looking after them both mentally, and I want to look out for them, but we look out for their physical health and making sure they're properly trained, but then also some economic benefit for what they did.
One last quick question. I want to ask the architect. Are the floor plans of the Capitol easily accessible to the general public via the internet? Are they accessible to members, to anyone that wants access to them?
No. It takes the House Office Building Commission speaker to approve release of the floor plans. In fact, it's even challenging to get my contractors who have to use those floor plans to do work to get a hold of the floor plans, because they're very, very tightly held.
There's been allegations that the insurrectionists had access to the floor plans of the Capitol. Have you been able to assert whether that was true or not?
I've only heard that in the media. I've not seen any indication of that, nor has the FBI who's investigating it given us any information that they have.
Do you have the records of anybody that would have, let's say if I wanted to get the floor plans and I instructed my staff to do it, will you have the records that they attempted to get the floor plans or download the floor plans?
Well, there's no way to download them because they're on a secure server. We hand out hard copies if it is deemed that it is needed for an individual to have the floor plans. But that group of people is exceptionally small on the Capitol complex.
Hacked? Could the secure server get hacked?
We have no indication of that. We have no indication of any AOC server being hacked.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Great line of questioning, Ms. Wexton, great line of questioning as well. I've got a couple of follow-ups, and then just for the members, we are going to do a second round. We'll probably have a 2-minute round so everybody can get another question in. And we want to be sensitive to everybody's time here with other committees going on and the responsibilities of our witnesses. Just a couple of questions, Mr. Blanton. First, I just want to say how much we appreciate you and how you've handled yourself through this whole ordeal. You've impressed a lot of people. Let me ask, you brought up the FBI, and there was a report supposedly from the FBI that went to the Capitol Police that Chief Sun said it never made its way up to him about, the threat level on January 6th. Were you aware at all of that FBI intelligence?
No.
One of the issues with the Capitol Police that, talking to Gus, was the head of the union there, and a lot of the rank and file members, was around the equipment. Were any of these issues around shields and helmets and batons and lack of equipment for some of the rank and file members? Did you ever hear that come before the police board?
Not in my tenure here. I won't. Maybe prior to my tenure, but I can say it's disturbing to what I heard afterwards. The limited amount of equipment and some of the anecdotes of people whose helmets are so old that the padding was rotting out of it. That was heart-wrenching to me.
Just out of curiosity, how many police board meetings, official meetings, were you in over your tenure here?
So it would have been 12 total.
So you do one a month. Okay. And what generally are the, again, we're trying to really figure out how this board is operating, because this is going to be, I think, at the heart of any reforms that we start proposing. What's the general length of time for some of those board meetings?
We schedule an hour and a half for the meetings.
Does it usually go that long?
It depends on the agenda. Some months when there's less information, Congress is out of session, for example, there's less stuff to pass, and so it won't go as long. When there's larger events going on, then they're longer meetings.
Okay. Have you talked to General Honore about?
Yes, several times.
Okay, how many times?
We've had, my staff has been in constant contact with his staff. They've been working significantly together, and I've had 2 direct meetings with him, and we have another one once he releases his draft findings dealing with facilities assessments.
Okay. I would be interested in, since we have you, and I know this is a longer conversation, and I think Ms. Herrera Butler touched on it. The issue of reforming the Capitol Police Board. I mean, clearly, if we want your opinion as to how we would move forward with any reforms. I mean, clearly, if the chief of police is saying to the sergeant at arms, in essence, we're screwed and we need help, and then the sergeant at arms just kind of single-handedly tells him no, without bringing it to the board, which is kind of what we're gathering here. What kind of reforms, also being sensitive to the fact that, we need to respond in a timely manner. So we don't want to, create another bureaucracy like we saw, happening with trying to get approval through the Department of Defense and all that. Any recommendations you can share with us here on maybe how we can adjust the board and how we respond appropriately and timely?
So what I think we should do is enlist in the DC area like-minded entities. You have the Secret Service; they have a command structure over them. You have Pentagon Force Protection Agency, which has a command structure over them, because obviously they don't make the decisions independently. And really have them look at what we are doing and propose best practices. I think an outside look at us is worthwhile.
And so basically continuing what General Honore is doing, but more in depth over a longer period of time.
Focused on, I look at General Honore isn't really looking at the command oversight of the Capitol Police. That is not one of his areas, unless he's been expanded since when he's talked to me. But that's something that is a valid thing to look at, and it'd be valid to take entities who've been under significant transition and had events and have changed because of those events. I mean, we've all seen events at the White House, events at the Pentagon over the past few years, and those organizations have changed dramatically. And it's a good look to see how can we change to support how to be more responsive than we have been in the past.
Well, we're certainly going to be leaning on you for your recommendations. We are going to go to a second round here, a little bit of a lightning round where we'll give each member 2 minutes to be able to ask questions. And so we're going to start with Mr. Amadei. If you want, you can certainly pass. I know there are other committees happening right now, so you want to be sensitive to that. All right, Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blanton, if we could go back just for a moment to the request that was made to expand the parameter. At any point after this request to move the parameter was made, did you or anyone at AOC deny any piece of this request, or did you have the assets necessary to fulfill this request?
So, no one at AOC denied, nor would anyone at AOC have the authority to deny the request, and we did have the assets.
To the best of your knowledge, was there any discussion or objection about those barriers in place because of the optics of it?
No, I will say, me personally, I had not heard the word optics until the discussions afterwards dealing with the National Guard and the Pentagon.
Thank you so much. And very quickly, in my last minute, Ms. Elliott, As curator of the House, do you feel it's important that we keep some record, some artifacts of what occurred on January 6th? I know some members have requested that broken glass windows and doors be kept. What is your feeling as curator of the House?
Thank you for the question. As curator of the House, I, under the direction of the clerk, am responsible for the House collection objects. And our first duty to those is to make sure the objects that already exist in the House collection are cared for as best we can. So in some cases for us, the most important thing is to make sure that that we first do no harm, that we make sure that we conserve and treat and clean the objects that already exist in the collection. And then after that, take stock of what are the artifacts that tell the story of the People's House right up through today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr.
Interim ranking member.
Yes, I appreciate the increase in my pay grade. Ms. Spindor, we understand that many of the rioters made off with some of the technological equipment from some of the offices they broke into, including, I understand, the laptop of the speaker. Are you confident that every piece of equipment that might pose a future cyber threat has been accounted for? And do you know exactly what was stolen and whether or not they still pose a cyber threat to us?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. I am aware through briefings with Capitol Police of some of the PCs. It's our understanding at this time it was only a few PCs from some of the offices. We do believe that based on what we know about one of the PCs, it is a very low risk to the House because of what we know how it was used.
Okay.
The other PC, we know who had that PC, and we feel like that it was a moderate to low risk. We are, of course, this is still a continuing criminal investigation, and I can't say too much more about it other than we took steps, as you know, during the insurrection to begin shutting off areas of the network that were impacted during the siege, and feel as though we did the right thing in doing that, protected any additional equipment.
Okay.
And we are also looking to roll out some additional security measures and are in progress for that to protect us in the future, to enhance the protection in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And back to Mr. Blanton, if I could real quickly, Mr. Chairman. There was a substantial request for an increase in appropriations having to do with the security assessments. And could you talk a little bit about the ongoing reviews that you have and the assessments of campus security and what deficiencies these assessments have in order to warrant a need for a more comprehensive review? I think the request is something in the neighborhood of $30 million.
Yes, thank you. So we did a transfer from my Library of Congress budget for the book module 7 up at Fort Meade to us. And that transfer was to cover historic costs from January 6th, the damage for January 6th, the immediate repairs, the cost for supporting the National Guard, and the cost to extend the fence line until March 31st. We asked for an additional $10 million to do a comprehensive security assessment. And this assessment was meant to synergize the assessments that all other entities are and should be doing. For example, Capitol Police is doing an internal one. A lot of it's going to focus on what they do with Capitol part of that may have some recommendations for facilities changes. General Honoré has a study. He's got 4 key tenets. One of those is dealing with quick facilities improvements. And then there's going to be other studies probably on the Senate, but there's one entity that looks across the entire campus, and including the Supreme Court and the Thurgood Marshall building, and can look at and can synergize all these requests into one so that we have a consistent footprint across the entire campus. And that's what I'm looking to do. Additionally, when we do this, we need to have executable projects that have budget level data so that I can tell you how much the project should cost and when we can get it done. By just saying things like, we should put hardened glass on all doors or all windows in the Capitol, that may or may not be executable. And I say this because the Capitol was designed in 1790. It was first started construction in 1793. It was never envisioned when they first laid the foundation that there would be a 9.7 million ton cast iron dome on top of it. It was expanded. Now, if you put over a ton of glass on the windows, that may cause structural problems, and we need to analyze that before it's just a good idea of putting stronger glass on windows. And that's what we do in our studies to make sure it's actually an executable project.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Mr. Newhouse, Mr. Case.
Thank you. 2 comments and a question. Comment to Ms. Elliott. Thank you so much for taking care of our cultural heritage. I think you said you needed an extra $25,000 supplemental to complete some of the assessments and damage repair, and I just wonder whether that's too low. This is not the time to come in with lower requests. I think we all want to do the right thing here. And then to Mr. Blanton, I would back to my initial line of questioning on how we best get the answers to what to do going forward. I would strongly endorse your instincts to get third-party best practices assessments from the DoD as well as service. And I would further ask you to consider whether further additional independent reviews may be necessary, because General Honoré is, as you pointed out, going to facilities assessment and the security issues. And what I think we're about here right now is an understanding of what broke down operationally, procedurally, and how to adopt an operational procedural framework that we don't go through the same mistakes all over again. And do we need external assessment, even at cost, to get the right answers there? Ms. Spindor, a very quick question following up on Mr. Newhouse. Is there any indication that there was any simultaneous or coordinated cyber attacks or cyber activity in your shop or, to your knowledge, elsewhere in the Capitol around the January 6th physical attack, which some claim was, spontaneous combustion, and of course, associated cybersecurity would cyber activity would indicate something other than that. Is there any indication of that?
There really is not. We've had individuals, other outside consultants that we use helping us check the network. We were monitoring everything real time, both the dark web as well as other areas of web activity. We have not seen any penetration of the network at all, any indication that anyone was trying to get into the network on January 6th.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mr. Case. Great questions. And I encourage all the members of the committee to, last year I went over and visited the cybersecurity offices over there and House administration. And it's a neat place to go, but it's that essential work that Mr. Case just brought up. And we've got to make sure, because I think moving forward, it's a very important point. I mean, we're talking about being aware of all the threats and being prepared with all the threats. And we saw with the pipe bombs at the RNC and the DNC, how that was coordinated in addition to what else was going on as a distraction. And so I think Mr. Case rightly, brings that point up about the issues around a coordinated effort around cyber. So we appreciate that. Mr. Amade. Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses again for all your great answers, and to my colleagues for asking a lot of the questions that I had. So thanks for that. I still am so in awe that I get to work in this place, and the amazing history that it has, and I never ever want to lose that. And so January 6th felt like a huge violation, for I think all of us, seeing people marching around in the Capitol and defacing it as they did. And I have thought many times how just days before I was present in the crypt when Virginia removed one of its statues from the Capitol, which was our statue of Robert E. Lee. And that was something that I spearheaded along with my colleague, Congressman McEachin, also from the Commonwealth of Virginia. So, which, by the way, they do at 3 a.m. For those, you guys probably already knew that, but I didn't until it was time for you guys to move it. So it was especially jarring to see the insurrectionists marching through the crypt, carrying the Confederate battle flag. And I thought more than once how glad I was that there was no longer that statue of Robert E. Lee there for people to take selfies with. So I was especially inspired to hear how staff was so quick thinking on January 6th and moved to preserve the safety of portraits like Congressman Joseph Rainey and Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American Congresswoman, as well as the new collections that honor Representative Rainey. Ms. Elliott, I would inquire if you have any information about whether any particular pieces or artifacts were specifically targeted by the mob on January 6th.
Thank you. No, I don't have any information that that's the case.
Well, that's reassuring. Now, were there hate symbols defacing any artifacts or property within the Capitol?
No, nothing on the House collection at all.
Okay. Well, I guess that's reassuring. So thank you for all that you're doing, and I'll yield back.
Great, thank you. Mr. Amade? Okay, going once. Let me ask the committee for unanimous consent. I want to submit Chair DeLauro's questions into the record. She was unable to be here today due to her own hearing, but remains deeply committed and dedicated to the safety and security of the legislative branch of government. Without objection, those questions will be submitted. Ms. Spindor, I just have a question. You mentioned, because I want to get some context, you mentioned that the, I forget how you said it, but it was the engagements or around the issues of some of the wellness visits, or I forget how you said it, but there were 1,150 in the 6 weeks from the January 6th event. Was that correct?
Yes, sir.
What's the context for that? So what's the how many visits happen in a year? And if you don't have that number, just.
I do. It's typically, I think we see 3,000 visits on an annual basis. So when you compare that to the 1,150, that's a critical percentage of what we normally see. And anticipate that we will continue to see some higher numbers. However, over the past week, we see things beginning probably about 50% of what we had seen the week before, but we're still providing the outreach and also literature and publicizing everything that we have to encourage people to keep coming like they always have. I mean, the Capitol Police, we've been serving since 2000, and we have a great relationship with them, and we will continue to reach out to them and make sure we're satisfying whatever need that the community has.
And are you guys how integrated are you with the House Office of Wellbeing and the wellness initiatives? Is that you guys pretty much in lockstep on how you communicate to the staff and members?
They are, and I think it's certainly Brian Wise with the Wellness Center. He is doing a great job, but it's a good thing that he works directly with Paul Tewksbury in the OEA. And so that helps them stay in sync with one another and make sure that they're supporting one another with whatever items that one of them may produce, the other one may be able to make use of it. And so it's a great relationship. So we're continuing. I want to put a plug in for Brian and his staff. What a great job they've done. And their storefront location that's open now in Longworth, we encourage staff to please go there and visit with them.
Yeah, we want to continue to try to push that out. You know, there's still a lot of people on the Hill that don't know about it, and we want to make sure that they recognize the resources that are there, both for mental health promotion and fitness and financial literacy, financial help, deals on all kinds of different programs, and it's really on the cutting edge. And that was the idea, is to make sure that the employees here, this was pre-pandemic and pre-January 6th, but that in a very high stress environment, that our employees here, while they may not make as much in the private sector as they would in the private sector, that they are offered the same kind of support that improve their quality of life and the quality of life of their families. And so we want to make sure we continue to promote that so that the men and women who work here have access to all of that. And I just want to personally just say thank you to you, Ms. Spindor. Immediately after January 6th, we saw, a number of the Capitol Police who were continuing to work 12 to 16-hour shifts. The influx of the National Guard who were here, and I think it's important for this committee to know how quickly you responded to open the Dunkin' Donuts, to make sure there was in the evening for the midnight shift, making sure there was food accessible for them, and how quickly you made those determinations. And I just want to personally thank you for that. That was it goes beneath the radar for most people, but how quickly you responded to make sure that they had what they needed, and that was very impressive. And we continue to thank you for your support. So we're gonna wrap it up. Let me just say, Miss Elliott, thank you for all you do. Again, much behind the scenes. Much of what you do is behind the scenes, but it clearly has made this such a special place, and we want to thank you for your service and your commitment to preserving this special building that we work in. Ms. Spindor, thank you again, and please thank your teams. We know that as members of Congress here, how important the staff is for all of us, unknown and unnamed many times, but please thank your teams for us. Mr. Bland, again, thank you for all your work. And moving forward, as I said, we're going to rely on all of you, Mr. Blanton, especially when it comes to these issues around security. We're going to be relying on your judgment, and we appreciate you and your viewpoint, because you've been very helpful in helping the committee understand exactly what transpired, and I think exposed some of those flaws that are in the system, especially around the Capitol Police Board, that seem wholly inadequate to addressing the needs that the members here had and the staff here had. So I also want to just take a second to thank our team, our staff, Steve and Anna and the minority staff, Rachel on my personal staff, and all the members of the committee. As the panelists can see, we have a lot of intellectual firepower here on both sides of the aisle, that care deeply about the role that this subcommittee now plays in protecting this institution and really crafting a model for how we move forward from both security standpoint and taking care of the men and women who are here, and hopefully that can be an example for how we should treat our workers around the country, and that's the goal of the committee. So with that, this committee is going to adjourn, and we'll see everybody tomorrow morning.